What would your life look like without discipline? You certainly wouldn't accomplish very much, nor would you have any real intimacy with God. Proverbs 3:12 tells us that the Lord disciplines those He loves. He's actively involved in correcting us and conforming us to His image. As a parent, you are called to model God's discipline with your children. But many parents stress over this, asking how much is too much, or am I too easy on my child? Today's email gives us an opportunity to talk about that. I have a very strong-willed and determined little 1-year-old. I want to raise him to serve and obey God. Would you explain what it means to discipline without breaking his spirit? Well, let's distinguish between two words here. That is, a child has their personhood. That's who they really are deep down inside. And then there are their actions, and sometimes we think those actions don't meet and match their personhood. We all came into this world with a self-will, and that self-will has to be brought into submission to God. That requires discipline on the part of God, and God has disciplined every single one of us in some way or the other. It also requires that you and I discipline our children to teach them how important it is to obey and to follow rules and regulations. Failure to discipline your children is an act of disobedience, because if you want them to grow up to be godly in any way at all, you've got to discipline them. A child's personhood is their personality. That's who they are. You don't want to break their spirit, their personhood. You want to deal and target with their actions. And all discipline should be targeted toward their actions. Well, how do we break a child's spirit? How do we work in their lives in such a way that their very personhood is injured? Well, we do so by refusing to listen, and we send the message, you don't count. You're not important. Refusing to listen is very devastating. We discipline without explanation. For example, if you don't say to that child, here's what I'm going to do, and here's the reason I'm going to discipline you, then they don't know where they are. Their personhood is confused. Do you not love me? And what's going on? Why are you treating me this way? Sometimes ignoring their opinions and their requests, because a child is a person. And oftentimes parents, I think, belittle that. But they have personhood. They have feelings. They have deep emotions. When we are made to feel helpless and hopeless, it is very demeaning to us. And sometimes I've seen that happen when parents have been overbearing, things they say to their children that demeans them in all kinds of ways. And one of the ways to hurt that child's spirit, their personhood, is to compare them with someone else. Why aren't you like so-and-so? Well, if you were like him, if you were like her, that is very demeaning. That strikes at who they are. That's not who they are. They're not someone else. They're your child. Using fearful words like this, you never, you always, very, very hurtful to a child's spirit. Because you see, God doesn't treat us that way. There's no such thing as always and never. Then, of course, expressing misdirected anger. Sometimes a parent, angry at someone else or about some situation, will take it out on their child. The child doesn't understand. Their personhood gets all mixed up in that kind of a situation because you've not identified what you're going to do, why you're doing it, and your motive's not right. Then I think one of the ways that you can really break a child's spirit is to criticize them when they have done their best. Have you ever been in that situation when you did the very best you know how and it wasn't good enough? It's never good enough. And you feel that. It goes on the inside. We're not dealing with actions now. We're talking about what that child is feeling. Then, of course, when you fail to lovingly touch them, loving words, compliments, or approval, a child who grows up without any of that is going to be hindered all of their life. They'll grow up feeling inadequate and that they never measure up. They'll grow up always reaching out and looking for approval and acceptance in some way. When you fail to provide good things and talk about good things and look forward, for example, to good things in their life, then what you're saying is you're sending a message in all these different ways. I don't count. I'm not worthy. I don't feel loved. If a child doesn't feel loved, it doesn't make any difference what you give them. There is no substitute for loving a child and causing that child to sense that love. Now, if the discipline is going to be correct, and if it's going to be targeted in the right direction, you have to ask yourself, first of all, why am I disciplining my child? Is it because you're upset because of something they said innocently or something they did? Or is it because of something going on inside of you? Secondly, carefully explain the reason you're disciplining them. I remember when my mother would whip me, and she did plenty of times, and I deserved all of it. She would tell me why. Now, I'm going to whip you, and this is the reason I'm going to whip you. Well, I never accepted that at first, but then I had to accept the fact, yes, I disobeyed, I did what she told me not to do, therefore I understood. Understanding why I was being disciplined caused me to love my mother, not to reject her. And then, of course, if you're going to discipline the child, explain it in a tone of voice that is loving. That is, you don't have to be mealy-mally about it, but you ought to say, this is the reason, and here's what I'm going to do, in a voice that they understand that you're not doing it out of anger. And which leads me to say, don't discipline your child in anger. That is, if you're angry about something, or the person, or whatever it might be, you get over that. Before you try to discipline them, well, here's what you'll do. You will, if you're striking, you'll strike harder. And what you're doing is you're getting something out of you onto your child to relieve something within you which is absolutely forbidden. If you want to discipline properly, keep your promises. If you say, if you do that, here's what I'm going to do. If they do that, do what you said you were going to do, or you create frustration in a child. If they can get by with this and get by with that, and then they can't get by with this, which in their minds is equal to all the rest, then they don't know where the lines are. And then when you discipline that child, share your regret for it. I'm sorry I have to do this. You know, I don't like doing this. But because I want you to be the kind of person that God wants you to be, and the kind of person I know that you want to be one of these days, this is the reason I'm bringing out this discipline. And then remember this. Never strike a child with your hand or slap them in the face. Now listen, if you switch them with something, it is that thing that touches them. When you slap a child in the face, that's you versus that person. Or you hit them in some fashion. You're striking at their insides. But if you use a switch or something else, or require some other form of discipline, that's one thing. But body to body is never the wise thing to do. Then, of course, when you've disciplined them, reassure them that you love them and that your desire for them is the very best, and you do this only because you know it's good for them. And you can say, you know, the Bible warns me, if I don't discipline you properly, He's going to hold me responsible. So remember, check the target. The target is not their personhood. It is not who they are. It is what they did or what they failed to do. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and I trust that this has been helpful. And if you are a parent, all of us who are parents and have been parents, we've all had to deal with these things. But if you'll just remember, and you probably didn't get all this down, maybe you should write us and say, look, give me all of that again, because every single thing that I mentioned is very important. So until next time, obey God, leave all the consequences to Him. That's living life at its very best. And when you leave the consequences to Him, you can trust Him to make your actions and your deeds very worthwhile.